You know what? Why don't we do this? I said, here, listen, Rob, grab that microphone. This is Rob Howe, ladies and gentlemen. Rob Howe. He also very good at improv, I've heard.
Mr. Roll With It.
Mr. Roll With It. Listen,
Rob Howe is one of our first guests. We're thrilled that you're here.
We will talk about Tandem a little bit after.
Yeah,
For now, if those of you who do not, I'd be surprised if you guys don't know who Rob Howe is, because he is a absolute legend. He was my first dia buddy, like the very first person that I met with diabetes that I was like, wait, I would be friends with you even if we didn't have diabetes in common. So our just our journey, we go way back. Rob is here from Dallas, Texas tonight, guys. He is a former professional basketball player, entrepreneur, and host of the Diabetics Doing Things podcast that has been downloaded
Take it in, Rob. Just
over 2 million times for listeners in over 80 countries. So, yeah, that deserves an applause. We're going to sit with him tonight and get to hear some of the lessons that he's learned from all these interviews and his journey with type 1 diabetes.
Before we go too far, the reason why you have such good photos is your wife is a fantastic photographer. She's amazing.
I'm so lucky.
Yes, everything you do looks great. Okay, so Rob, listen, let's just get right into this, okay? You were diagnosed in 2005, right? You are 16 years old. You're right in the middle of like teenage angst, let's call it that, okay? So that's tricky enough as it is. But now we're here, it's like almost 20 years later. And you have built, I'm gonna call it what it is. It's a powerhouse platform with Diabetics Doing Things. And you've interviewed over 400 people from around the world. Tell us, like, what sparked the idea to get this thing started in the first place? You know, like that moment where you're like, okay, I think I'm on to something. And then what is it, because 400 episodes is a lot. What is it that is at the heart of that lets you keep going with this? Because it's not easy to do, sustainable. We've talked about that for so many times.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here and to be the first guest and for that lovely introduction. I want to answer the question by also thanking both of you, because you were both in the first 20 conversations that I had. And Lauren, I was very similar to you. I was like, I would be friends with this person, whether diabetes was a part of it or not. And I kind of had resigned myself to that was never going to happen for me, that I was never just going to connect with someone with diabetes beyond diabetes. And so Neil, also, I remember you, after we stopped recording, you just said like the nicest things about what I was doing, and I'll never forget that. So you guys are my great friends beside all this. And I think that's what keeps me going, is the relationships that I built. So many people here in this room, I feel like I really know. And many of you, I count you my real IRL friends. Chat, you guys are at home are probably the same way. And that's what keeps me going, because you're right, it is incremental progress, but that is such a great metaphor for diabetes. You don't get to 400 conversations all at once. You don't get to in-range blood sugars at an event all at once. You got to take into account the caffeine and all that. Yeah. I don't know, am I going too long? You're cutting.
No, I'm just saying, I was 100% saying, yes, the caffeine hits. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it does.
So you've had everyone on your show, Rob, from artists to CEOs to advocates, athletes. Can you walk us through the incredible range of people that you've interviewed, and who were the guests that made you think like, wow, this community is so diverse and it's so inspiring?
Yeah, I think when you start to make things online, you never really know who's gonna listen to it or who's gonna like it or share it. And I think my goal was to do 10 episodes. I'm a stats guy. If you guys don't know this, 90% of the podcasts on iTunes only have 3 episodes. So if you get past 3 episodes, like, you're in the top 10%. So my goal was to do 10 episodes. And if one person reached out and said that they liked it, I would keep going.
Yeah. Okay.
So that was the brief. That was the challenge. And early on, I got to interview you guys, and I really enjoyed that. But when it really started to cement for me that I needed to keep doing this was I got an email from a guy in Australia. And he said, hey, Rob, I love listening to your podcast. I just binged all these episodes while I was driving to a family event. And this guy's name is Jeremy Robertson. And he's become my great friend. And I've gotten to meet him twice in person. Jeremy's entire life, he wanted to be a pilot. And he was a pilot for Qantas Airlines by the time he was 31, flying LA to Sydney, which is like their primary route. He was a big wig, big dog. He gets diagnosed with diabetes in LA. They tell him he can't fly anymore. And this is in the early 2000s. And, I might have taken that news harshly and kind of gotten down, maybe listened to some sad music, some Postal Service. That was what was playing when I found out I was diagnosed. Shout out.
No, you remember? You remember
oh yeah,
what was playing?
yeah. It was a really rainy day. Postal Service was on. It was kind of soothing.
Oh my God.
No, but Jeremy decides, he's like, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to medical school, like you do. So he graduates from medical school 7 years later. He's now a pilot and a doctor. Fast forward a few years, he got to come to Dallas, where he was meeting at an airline conference with the heads of the FAA of Australia and the United States. And today, there are people with type 1 diabetes flying commercial airliners, including Mr. Jeremy Robinson.
Wow.
So
Shout out
that
to
was when
Jeremy.
I knew it was special.
Yeah. We've actually had 2 or 3 years ago, we had Pietro Marsala, who is also type 1 and is now a pilot for American Airlines. So it really is pushing forward.
And yeah,
what's
and
possible.
Pietro was the first pilot to get his wings
Yes.
back with type 1. So an amazing community. Pilots are crazy. They like all know each other. It's weird. Wow.
So that's it. And then what is there anybody else that you can share, like stories inspiring? Maybe I know you've had a lot of athletes on.
I love athletes, so shout out to you guys. I see myself in you, and we can, connect on a deeper level. Over the years, I've become a huge advocate for sharing your own story. I don't care who you are, whether you are a weekend warrior or you started a business, or honestly, you might think your life is boring. Your story can connect to someone else. There's someone out there with diabetes who needs to hear that. And my example of that is Gary Forbes, who is the most recent person to play basketball in the NBA with type 1 diabetes. And the reason I say the story part is because Gary didn't know this, but when he was playing for the Denver Nuggets in 2009, I was playing for the University of Colorado Springs Mountain Lions. Slightly less well-known.
Know of them.
Tiana, though, is a UCCS alum,
there
and so
she
is
is.
NBA
There she
champion
is.
Derek White.
knows.
So shout out
She knows.
Mountain Lions. However, he did an interview with the Denver Post, maybe just a little throwaway soundbite about having type 1 diabetes that I read when I was 20 years old, considering quitting, not because of diabetes, but I wasn't loving basketball. I wasn't having a great time. And I saw this guy talking about diabetes playing in the NBA, and I didn't quit. And now Gary and I are friends. And we're going to talk about camps that we've done together later today. But if he doesn't do that soundbite, maybe I'm not on this stage. And maybe there is no Diabetics Doing Things podcast. And you talked about the millions of downloads or whatnot. The most important metric for me is that the time listened to the podcast is now over 100 years. So what? I'm yapping online, chat, and people are listening over a century. Crazy. You never know. With incremental progress, if you keep showing up, how far you can go. You could be at an event that I never thought this event would happen. I never thought I'd be in a room with people celebrating their diabetes. This did not exist. And look at, I was talking with Jim earlier, 53 years he's lived with diabetes.
Jim also flew in
Come
for
on,
this
Jim.
event.
Jim flew here.
Shout out to
Yeah.
Jim.
So your story, no matter how banal you may think it may be, can connect with someone who knows where. So tell it.
Wow. Okay, so point on the board for Rob for using the word banal in a sentence. I didn't think we were going to get that today. Point on the board. So here, okay, so curious here. Like there has to be a certain amount of vulnerability that you have with being able to tell your story. And you get these people on the podcast or on social or however that is, and for some reason you get them to open up. Like there's this sweet spot that you have found where they own their diagnosis story, which it seems like it didn't used to happen that way. People didn't talk about it, and now all of a sudden it's out there. How do people get from that point where they're like, no, I'm going to keep this a secret, to all of a sudden they're like, yeah, you know what? Like I'm going to tell my story, and I'm going to do it unapologetically. How do you get to that spot?
Let's talk about vulnerability, because it's an exchange. You know, it exists on a spectrum. And for me, don't let me get you on the phone, because we're going to talk about what I want to talk about. So that's, I think, where I really, on the podcast format, it's just a long form phone call. And I love to listen to people, and I love to connect. But I also have come up with this saying over the years that everyone with diabetes is diagnosed twice. Once when the doctor tells you, or you discover that, or maybe you're screened. And then another time when you accept it as part of who you are. You guys know and are familiar with the cycles of grief. Acceptance is the final stage. I think that is the second diagnosis. And so when people raise their hands and they share their story, like I talked about earlier, there's a vulnerability exchange there. Ooh, that's cool. with the mic. So if Lauren doesn't say, hey, I have type 1 diabetes, if I don't make that first post on the beach holding my insulin pump and saying, hey, I have diabetes, I'd love to connect with people, I think that would help me. We're not here. So you have to give to get those things. And I think some of you have been on the podcast. I think I do a pretty decent job of making it a safe space to explore.
And if I can make a comment there, I think what's really interesting is that there's almost this sense that if you've had diabetes for 6 months or a year or 2 years or 3 years, right? Like that's kind of the point after newly diagnosis, like you should accept it, or you like that's what you would expect. And I thought for me, like that I accepted diabetes. I mean, I was just like, yep, this is something I have. I'm going to go through life with it. But truly, it wasn't until probably a decade later, maybe even 15 years after living with type 1, when I really, truly understood what it meant to accept it and release the shame that can be attached with feeling different and wanting to kind of like keep it in the shadows, that you realize, oh, wow, acceptance doesn't have a timeline, right? And it comes at different stages for all of us.
Yeah, it's different for sure.
And I think too, we don't know what we're missing out on by not being open to it. I like you guys have been very fortunate as a patient advocate, getting to go to industry conferences where it's mostly doctors and industry professionals. And I'll never forget, in 2018, I went to my first ADA scientific sessions, and I got to go to the poster room. Now, I am an idiot, okay? I was a valedictorian. I'm legally required to tell you that, but like, I'm not a smart scientist guy. So walking through the poster sessions can be a little bit tough. But I found this one poster, and it said, it was a really simple survey, and it was HbA1c outcomes and involvement in diabetes blogs and social media. And 100% of the people who answered yes to, am I involved with diabetes blogs or social media, had better A1C outcomes than those that didn't. And that's when it really clicked for me, because I knew that was true for myself. When I started to be open, my life with diabetes changed. And my management, you could look at a bell curve of my A1Cs over my life. It's better now that I'm open. And I think that's a thing I wish I would have known getting into it, but now I got to discover.
So with your personal experience, but also with all the guests that you've interviewed, what lessons or insights do you see repeatedly coming up? I imagine acceptance is one of them. What else, whether it's access or support, growth mindset, community advocacy, or even just, learning to listen to your body? Like, can you talk more about that?
Yeah. So what do we all have in common, or what do I think the people who are doing well with diabetes have in common? The first thing is access. If you don't know, and let's not just get into like affordability on that, which is extremely important, but health equity starts with access to information. If you don't know that that a CGM exists, or that an insulin pump exists, or there's different types of insulin, some of you who are on TikTok probably saw there's like an inhalable insulin viral video that pops off every like 6 weeks because no one has ever heard of it. And so if you're not tapped in and you don't know, and your care team maybe you're from a rural area, you've never heard of insulin pumps, you think that's not for you, you don't know. And then support system, I think, is the next one, whether it's family or parents. In my case, I had the best parents you can have, and they allowed me to live independently with my diabetes, and they really helped me learn early on. And honestly, diabetes kind of clicks with me. I kind of get it. So I was very just lucky in that way. And then it kind of goes to mindset, right? Because diabetes it's relentless. Every day it's there. It was there for me today on the plane. It was there for me today in the green room. It's going to be there today after I get off the stage. I'm probably going to go crash down. The people who live well with diabetes don't look at those numbers or those experiences with judgment. They have a growth mindset, and there's a lot of stuff about growth mindset. And so I'm not here to beat you over the head with the mindset stuff. I have bad days too. But what we know now about resilience and doing hard things like managing diabetes, like being a pancreas, builds more resilience. It's like strength training. You don't go in on your first day and crush your max, or like, qualify for the Olympics. You got to keep at it. You got to work. And diabetes is the same way. So if you're out there thinking that way and you want to be successful, I think a lot of that is mindset.
Let's do that. First of all, hopefully you guys were all recording that, because that was really, really good. All right,
I'm good for a soundbite.
Okay, that's good. Here for the sound bites. All right, so 2 minutes here. Rob, like if we could talk, you mentioned Diabetes Legends. Okay, this is your basketball camp. I know you're passionate about this. It's in year 3. Like, just go. If you could go off for 2 minutes, take us there.
Hoop and yap.
This is a huge deal.
It is. I'm, if nothing else, a guy that loves basketball camp. And I didn't even know going into the first year in 2023, I didn't even know what it was until we showed up. And we were there on the day. I was unloading the t-shirts. I was getting the basketballs out. And then I realized what we were doing was having basketball camp for kids with diabetes. And Gary Forbes walked in the door. Lauren Cox has walked in the door, the only woman with type 1 diabetes to play in the WNBA. They get to be my friends. There's basketball players all over the world that are going to host Diabetes Legends clinics because kids need to go sweat and meet other kids with diabetes and see people who have lived with diabetes chasing their dream at the highest level.
Come on.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Huge.
And yeah, like my vision for the world is a more equitable world for people with diabetes where we can live and work and have families and do things that we want to do. And for our kids at these clinics, they're extremely low cost. We have amazing sponsors. We have people who believe in what we do. And because of that, some kids' lives are being changed. And that's not hyperbole. We're saving kids' lives by having fun playing basketball. And like, what greater mission could I have? Like, take me off the earth. Like, if that's all I'm doing, it's worth it for me.
Yeah. I've seen so many pictures from your posts. The thing that I notice about them, you have a smile on your face, Gary has a smile on his face, and every one of those kids are smiling from ear to ear. They're having a blast.
There's something magic about connecting with other people with diabetes, no matter what age you are.
It has been so fun being friends with you and just sitting on the sidelines from the past since 2017, like watching Diabetics doing things evolve and what it's turning into and the heart behind it. So thank you so much, Rob, for sharing that with us today. And
I don't want to cut off because I know I'm at time, but gratitude is the last thing that we all have in common, living well with diabetes. I'm so grateful to be here today. And for all of you guys out there living with diabetes, for all of you at home, it's still early. If you were born in any other time in history, you'd be dead. And so that's exciting. Let's go.
It's the truth. It's the truth. Give it up for Rob Howe.
Rob Howe, everyone.
Rob, incredible. Thank you, my man.